January 3rd, 2026, 2:01 a.m. Every light in Caracas went out at the same time. Perhaps in that moment, Nicolás Maduro felt it, the massive wall of security he had built for years, tearing apart like paper. As U.S. Delta Force operators moved toward his bedroom inside Fuerte Tuna, the former bus driver likely had only one thought dominating his mind: survival. For him, power was never just a seat in office. It was an identity, a personal myth, a kind of self-appointed messiah complex. That night, as more than 150 aircraft roared over Caracas, the silence from his allies delivered a brutal lesson. In dark psychology, loyalty exists only as long as power does. This is the story of how one man turned an entire country into a laboratory, and how he ultimately suffocated inside the darkness he created. If you enjoy deep psychological and geopolitical analysis like this, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel by liking the video. To understand Maduro's psychology, we need to go back to March 8, 2000. That day, he declared, "Cuba is a sea of happiness. Venezuela is heading there." This single sentence defined the limits of his vision, a mindset willing to pay any price for an ideological utopia. According to analysts, Maduro never derived legitimacy from the people, but from being personally appointed as Chávez's successor. This likely created a deep fear of remaining in the shadow. To compensate, he mythologized himself as Chávez's son and the worker of the people. Yet behind the mask, he constructed a delicate balance of power, a form of Bonapartism where civilian authority and the military merged. By placing military figures at the head of oil institutions like PDVSA, he ensured that the barrels of guns were pointed outward, never at him. Maduro mastered chaos as a tool of control. On November 19, 2013, he labeled nationwide shortages an economic attack and secured emergency powers to act against private companies. Just weeks earlier, on October 24th, he claimed the crisis was a psychological war, deliberately targeting the public's perception of reality. In his mind, hunger was not a failure. It was leverage. Through the fatherland card system, food aid was tied directly to political loyalty. The message was simple and absolute: obey, or you don't eat. The exodus of more than 7 million people was not a tragedy to him. It was the removal of opposition from the system. The Absolute Resolve operation, launched on the night of January 3, 2026, dismantled Maduro's entire strategy. When he was captured, wearing gray sweatpants, blindfolded, noise-canceling headphones over his head, and escorted onto a naval warship, the towering image of the anti-imperialist leader collapsed into that of a single, exhausted man. Perhaps his greatest miscalculation was believing that allies such as Russia, China, Iran, and Turkey would stand by him the moment the United States intervened. But geopolitics is not driven by emotion. It is driven by interests. When the security apparatus collapsed, most of the generals he had trusted chose silence. In the very first minutes of the operation, at 2:01, when electricity across the entire city was cut, Maduro must have realized that control itself was only an illusion. In dark psychology, the delusion of omnipotence rapidly transforms into a profound sense of vulnerability when confronted with a real threat. The silence of Russia, his longtime provider of technical military support, and Cuba, his strategic intelligence partner, painfully revealed how fragile alliances truly are, built not on loyalty, but on a balance of interests. As U.S. Delta Force operators entered his bedroom, the only thought echoing in his mind was likely this: the massive shield of protection he had constructed, much like the Russian air defense systems that failed to activate that night, was nothing more than a paper fortress. On January 5th, 2026, when he was brought before Judge Alvin Hellerstein in a federal court in Manhattan, Maduro activated his final narcissistic defense mechanism. According to court records, he stated, "I am the president of Venezuela. I consider myself a prisoner of war." This was the refuge of victim psychology in a leader's mind, an attempt to reframe himself not as a defendant accused of drug trafficking and narco-terrorism, but as the heroic target of a global conspiracy. Yet neither the masses whose loyalty he had purchased through the so-called fatherland card, Carnet de la Patria, nor the oil contracts he had handed over to his generals were enough to save him. The entire Gordian knot he had built was cut away in a single military strike, silently sanctioned by the very allies he believed would protect him. Venezuela today resembles a Gordian knot. Even if it has been cut with a sword, no one knows where the threads truly lead. Is Maduro's removal enough to end systemic decay overnight? Can a society whose institutions have been dismantled truly become free through the fall of a single leader? Or is this merely the beginning of a new form of chaos? We're waiting for your thoughts in the comments. This knot runs too deep to be untangled by the departure of just one man. It has taken root across the state's entire nervous system. For more than 25 years, Maduro embedded civilian and military bureaucracy into a spiral of narco-terrorism and corruption so pervasive that the system's rot now flows like a virus through the veins of the state. In this military oligarchic order known as Bonapartism, oil concessions and food distribution networks handed to the armed forces have created a minefield, one where thousands of generals determined to preserve their privileges even after Maduro remain on alert. Years of sustained psychological warfare reshape the public psyche, producing deep uncertainty and learned submission. When a society is made dependent on tools like the fatherland card, Carnet de la Patria, for food and basic necessities, can the removal of a single leader erase the deeply embedded psychology of fear and dependency? In this laboratory state model, where people found food not when they were hungry, but when they were obedient, the rebirth of free thought cannot be achieved through an election alone. Maduro may be in custody, but institutions molded under his control, such as the Supreme Court and the National Electoral Council, remain staffed by the same loyal figures. The swearing in of Delcy Rodriguez as interim president may reflect not a transition, but the system's instinct for self-preservation, a simple change of mask. The true power center, the military, could obstruct a genuine democratic transition at any moment, driven by fear of losing economic privileges or facing prosecution for past human rights abuses. Meanwhile, the United States' claim to manage Venezuela, combined with its openly stated appetite for the country's vast oil reserves, risks turning this intervention into the beginning of a new era of resource imperialism rather than a liberation effort. The Trump administration's promise to open Venezuela's wealth to American companies and repair its infrastructure could reduce the population to mere pawns in a global energy chessboard, rather than restoring their agency over their own future. True freedom does not begin when a dictator, exhausted, stands before a judge in Manhattan. It begins when the chains of fear, repression, and corruption that dictator embedded in the collective mind are broken one by one. Venezuela may now be trapped in that dark twilight zone where an old regime has died, but a new and free system has yet to be born. You've reached the end of the video. For more psychological profiles and geopolitical analysis, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Until the next dark analysis.